life about. And so I came up with what meant something to me, 3 sequential steps. Simple. I hope to remember. I hope you will think about them and work with them. It simply goes like this. Step 1, I exist. I exist. To never forget. To never forget what it is to recognize that God has given you life in this world. Relationships to form. Experiences to take in. Music to wash over your soul. Religious inspiration to encourage you. Opportunities without limit. But you first have to realize and appreciate. In unity, it was more commonly expressed as I am. But that means I exist. I've told you the story of Myrtle Fillmore as she walked around Unity headquarters, about 600 on the staff. Can you imagine how many times she was greeted in the hallway? Good morning, Mrs. Fillmore, how are you? Her response, I am. She fully appreciated that. She did not go into the typical responses, well, I'm so-so, I've had better days, I'm not my best. I am. And to me, that's the essence of what I experience, what I hope to convey in this lesson, that first step. Paul expressed it, speaking to the learned, highly cultured Greeks of Athens in Paul's day. They were all discussing different understandings of God, of mythology, of the divine. And Paul said to this diverse crowd, in God you live and move and have your being. For me, that was a more poetic form of my version. Can you imagine? I have the shorter 2-word version. Seems pretty strange from me, but just relishing your very existence. And then step 2 we talked about last week. I experience. I take in from this world things that encourage, that inspire, that uplift, that give me power. And at times, if I choose, I can dwell upon these world experiences in a way that saddens me, discourages me, frustrates me. But it is what it is. Like this week, going through all this commotion around the church, I would rather have had it nice and easy, calm and pleasant, peaceful and sweet, here in my workplace, place of ministry. But it was necessary for this, that everything must change. No one and nothing remains unchanged. For change is what? Life at work. The Holy Spirit, which simply means the whole Spirit and power of God, is at work here, now. If you were like me, and some of you were raised in my case, the Baptist church, Great emphasis was placed on the God of the past, the God recorded in the Bible, both the Hebrew Testament and the Christian Testament. That God that did great things for those people long ago. And I grew up, I know, I realized it, with a bias. I remember our minister, a very educated man, asking our young people's group one time, are there still miracles? And I think I was just raising to scratch my ear or something. James, what do you have to say? What about miracles? Oh, I don't think those happen anymore. They happened in the time of Jesus, in the time of the prophets, in the ancient days. Wait a minute. Fortunately, I grew out of that idea. I am a miracle. I felt it throughout my body as I was healed. That the miracle was God working in me here now, not in Egypt, not in Jerusalem. Now, bringing forth my good, my possibility to continue my life, even to bring me to Minnesota so that I could be with you. But I think about that, getting to know you, working with you. I can remember when the doctor said there's a good chance you won't survive. And this would have never happened. So living through that, as many of you have, in challenges, in illness, in so-called disasters and catastrophes, it's not pleasant. No one would say that it was. But everything must change. And there's something, some power, some invisible something that's with you. It always will be. I think of that. We said goodbye to our member of 30 or so years, Cindy Kaler. Now, there was a unique creation, and I mean that with love. She was an extraordinary person, one of the first that reached out to me when I came to this city and said, "Oh, I've got things you've got to see." And started taking me out in what she loved. She said she found God in the beauty of the world, and what I'm calling that second step, I experience. That's what brought her joy. And she said a phrase that's going to inspire me for a very long time. She said, "I'm not so religious. I don't go looking for God. I look for good." Hear that? She didn't go looking for a personality, a great character. She looked for the expression of God in this world as good, as she understood it, as she was able to behold it, as she experienced life. That's what we can cling to when change is tearing our life apart, at least in our understanding. When relationships end, when friends pass. Somebody from my past a long time ago in college, we were roommates and dear friends. her husband recently died. And as she was preparing the service and looking at old photos, as we do, she ran across photos from 1984. Wow, 40 years ago. She was a photographer, and photos she took of her husband, Don, and me. And I thought, wow, times have changed. I've gotten older. But then I laughed because the picture she sent me, as a young man, I had hair this length. I can't wait to email her back and say, the cycles of time. You sent me beautiful pictures, and I just so happened to be growing my hair out like those photos at this time. These surprises of life. We go, things change, and then we come back and we recognize something. Here it is again. I have the opportunity to work with this again in my life. Am I going to do it the same way? Have I learned something on my path that's going to help me this time around with a challenge? Or even getting lost in excitement and celebration in life, woo, 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 and losing my sense of myself. What it is to take a role on in life that we may deem necessary in a relationship, as a caretaker, in a career. And one day we wake up and I've become my job. I become this part of another person's life. I've become a religious leader. And you realize it's time to go and reclaim I exist, that sense of self and being. That's the balance of life. And so in this third lesson today, our conclusion, the other two-word phrase, I exist, I experience. Today, I create. I create. Many of you have heard of the concept in unity, not that we own it, but the concept that we are co-creators with God. Working with the possibilities that God has given us, we see them in the 12 powers in our windows. God has given us possibilities to develop in our life. We co-create. God has given you the capacity of love or compassion. You, in living your life, develop that capacity. How expansive will your love be? How deep will you develop the faculty of wisdom in your life? This is all co-creating with God. And I'm not talking just about the latest idea from a self-help book. These are the essentials, the principles of being. Myrtle Fillmore liked to call them the potentialities of being. I love that big word. But the possibilities within you if you choose to align with your God-given gifts and to do something, to create them, to develop them in your life. Sometimes that can get to be a challenge. And so I just wanted to remind us of possibilities, of what you are capable of doing. Now, talk about a mystery unfolding, as Patricia sang those words. Many know, not just because she's running as a presidential candidate, but many of us are more familiar. Years ago, Marianne Williamson's first book, Return to Love. Return to that power, that connection, that possibility within you. And she offered a mysterious line that sounds kind of counterintuitive. She said, most people, I paraphrase, most people are not afraid of their limitation. They're afraid to admit how powerful they are. God power. What does it mean in unity when we say, you have come forth from God, your Creator? Or centuries ago, and many still follow the tradition of the Rosicrucians, who made their foundational statement, ex Deo nascimur, in Latin, but meaning, we come forth or are born of God, come forth from God. And they knew that meant power, possibility, the ability to heal yourself, your relationships, your world, because you had come forth from the divine Spirit that makes all things possible. The resurrected Christ, the risen one, recorded in our book of Revelations, that is the revelation that came to John on the island of Patmos, heard those words, behold, I make all things new. What is it to know that power? That you have this ability, not in your individual personality, not in James, but in the fact that you have come forth from life. All things are possible. Myrtle Fillmore, who passed from this world in 1931, in the 1920s, one of the very few sound recordings we have of her voice, which I love to do because she sounded like Eleanor Roosevelt. We must teach our children to pray. To pray the prayer of faith, a prayer that we sing, and a prayer that sometimes mystifies us if we don't approach it rightly. The prayer of faith, written by Hannah More Kohlhaas in the 19th century, Myrtle found it, and she realized it was a tool by which she could align herself with her truth as God's creation. It's similar to how we end our prayer of protection every Sunday. It's not part of the prayer, but many of us choose to seal that prayer with the statement, all is well. It's a statement that goes back to the mystic Julian of Norwich in the 14th century. She has the fame of having written a book called Divine Revelations, which made her, as far as we know, the first woman to publish a book in the Western world in the 1300s. And she wrote, all is well, all is well, all manner of thing shall be well. It was a way as a mystic. It was a way for Myrtle Fillmore to lift herself, to align herself with higher truth. Do you have the flu? Take your temperature. Comes out, the thermometer says 103. And you go, all is well, all is well. There is no fever. Or those New Thought ministers in hell that say, it's not hot and I'm not here, as an idea of denying. No, Myrtle said, when I pray to God, she asked her students, she said, when I pray, to whom do you think I pray? And someone muttered, oh, well, to God, of course. And she said, no, I'm praying to myself. That is, to lift myself from my limited ideas into my truth as God's creation. And in that truth, all is well. In my everyday temporal life that changes, things may not appear to me that all are well, but you lift yourself to the high truth, and then you know all is well. Myrtle liked that prayer, and just the opening line, you can hear how she's trying to capture for herself, because she had her own healing challenges and challenges throughout her life. God is my help in every need. God does my every hunger feed. God walks beside me, guides my way through every moment of the day. That means here, now. Not in Jerusalem in Jesus' day. Not in Abraham's desert. Not in Moses, even when he was on the mountaintop. A prayer is to lift you here and now into your power, into what can be, in what transforms, heals, inspires, empowers you. The Fillmore's son, Lowell Fillmore, there's a book written about him called The Unsung Hero. And that title comes from the fact that so many of us don't remember that they appointed their eldest son, Lowell, to be the business manager, ultimately president of Unity School, of our headquarters, in 1909. He spent his entire life until he retired in 1965. He faced many challenges in the Unity operations, in keeping it going and keeping it growing and keeping it expanding. And he wrote these words that somebody thoughtfully engraved into a bronze plaque that's on the grounds of Unity Village, and it expresses how he approached the challenges. First, people who knew him said when a challenge came, or even a new idea or project for Unity to take on, what was the question he asked? Well, most of us would say, well, how much will that cost? Lowell's response was always, how many people will be helped? That's how he made his decision. Not the cost, but how much good it would do, how much God it would express. And so he wrote these words about his own challenge. When for a purpose I had prayed and prayed and prayed until my words seemed worn and bare with arduous use, and I had knocked and asked and knocked again and asked again, and all my fervor and persistence brought no hope. I paused to give my weary brain a rest and cease my anxious human cry. In that still moment, after self had tried and failed, there came a glorious vision of God's power, and lo, my prayer was answered that hour. When he aligned himself not with circumstance, but with possibility. When he aligned himself with what the power of Spirit could do through him, if he lifted his vision. This theme I create is not to give you special words, magical incantation, to change the circumstances of your life, to bring into life some great desire. I'll win the lotto. I'll win the lotto. I'll win the lotto. That's not what these statements are about. These statements are to enhance your creative power, your ability to make a difference in this world for good by aligning yourself with your higher truth, that you are a child of God. To recognize, I exist. I'm here. I have this opportunity called life. I take in all this awesomeness. Young people like to say, awesome sauce. It's to realize a circumstance in all its glorious and power and opportunity by saying, it's showered with awesome sauce. It's showered with God. And now this third step, and our closing, but yet really our beginning, is to realize I create. I'm doing something here and now. And as the mystery unfolds, thank you, Patricia, the mystery unfolds, we will realize consciously, am I doing God? Am I doing good? Am I giving God expression? I remember I was in ministerial school when 9/11 happened. We had heart-wrenching, soul-challenging discussions. And it was like, wow, God has given us this gift of strength, of courage, of endurance, of creativity, all these gifts, and here are a few who chose to use that power in a way that brought death and sorrow and destruction to thousands. Well, that's about the biggest example I know of how we can misuse God's gift. Perhaps in more subtle ways, you're tempted to exercise power over a coworker, a family member, misusing these God-given capacities in a way that does not uplift, empower, but oppresses, brings others down. So to realize I create. What's the unwritten line? What am I creating? What am I bringing into existence? There's where the rubber hits the road. There's where we have to make decisions as unity students, as spiritual students, as human beings. Well, that must be an indication to wrap it up. So, on that note, I'm going to take us into a simple moment of silence to turn your attention within and take these 3 steps. Let them speak to your heart. Let them awaken your mind. To meditate on them, contemplate them. What does this mean in me? Take a breath or two just to relax yourself. Wow. I go to the mountaintop within my soul, and before I look out on the